This is the chart for the formation of Israel, a country that is currently in the midst of tremendous turmoil after a surprise Hamas attack on a level that has not been seen probably in history. And you can see in the chart why, based on planetary correlations, although at the same time you also realize pretty quickly the difficulty in finding precise correlations in astrology when you're not totally sure what time of birth to use. And so this is for 4 p.m., but apparently according to the historical record, 4 p.m. is when the meeting was called in regard to forming the country, but it was not proclaimed as formed until they went through the paperwork and various declarations and various things. And it was 4:32 p.m. when the country was proclaimed as born, which would put the ascendant further down in Libra, closer to Scorpio. There is also a record of astrologer Alexander Marr, who was very good at analyzing and rectifying. He felt that the chart should be 26.25 degrees Libra. And then there are even arguments by astrologers who think it should be very early Scorpio, since 4:37 puts it in early Scorpio and that it fits the country better. I'm inclined to go with Libra somewhere in this region, and I'll explain as I go along why. But for now, I'll say that I'm inclined that Libra is the correct ascendant. And in fact, one of the correlations would be that Mars right now, as the planet of war, without doubt, war and violence and Mars go together hand in glove. And you see it October 7th at 27 degrees, very close to the ascendant of the country, which definitely fits with a catastrophe of this nature, the violence of it. And then you also see through these broken lines the effect of the 150-degree aspect, which is known as Quinconks or inconjunct. And you may recall from prior videos where I explained that aspect links the natural first sign with the natural 8th and 6th, thereby implicating in health and death matters. And this is something I see again and again when something happens in those two areas. It makes it a very complicated aspect. Though, of course, if you happen to, as an individual, experience this type of aspect, it's not going to make you sick or kill you every single time you experience them many times throughout your life. However, at points of vulnerability, it can definitely be very difficult. But however, back to this, you see that the transit in Pluto, which right now, October 7th, is practically at the stationary point, which happens on the 11th. A station is such that the planet slows down and stops, thereby magnifying its power. Pretty much the whole month is the Pluto station. The peak is on the 11th, but essentially we're there. And where that is, in the Israeli chart, puts it really close to the ICMC axis, for that matter, not that far away from the zenith axis. It's a very vulnerable point. The 4th is literally the homeland. And Pluto, as a planet of strong correlation with terrorist action and as much violence, if not more, than Mars, think of Pluto in a way as a super Mars. It's the higher octave of Mars. And in these degrees, it's 150 to the Israeli Mars. So it's linking those forces in a very complicated way. And it's an almost perfect correlation for what is taking place. And then, if you're looking at the surprise nature of the event, Uranus, as the planet of shock and surprise and unexpected events, is effectively right on the Israeli sun, because although here you see it at 22.5, this planet stationed in late August at precisely these degrees. And even if it hadn't stationed at 23 plus, 22 is more than close enough. It's totally applicable here. So you see it next to the sun, and in doing so, it makes its own inconjunct 150 to the Israeli ascendant, which would still be valid even if it were a bit further down, like 26 degrees or 27, for example. So on those two alone, you've got a pretty major problem. That's 2 out of the 4 outer planets, the ones beyond Saturn. But you can throw Neptune in there as well, because Neptune, as now the 3rd outer planet, first of all, in the Israeli chart, you see it opposite Eris and square Venus. So you've got a T-square here. And this is a pretty contentious situation from the Eris immediately, because Eris being in Aries, in the 7th, open enemies, it's going to be a tricky T-square. Neptune becomes a problematic planet immediately. And so Neptune, at the moment, is transiting in late Pisces, squaring the Uranus and the Jupiter. And you can see it here. in those degrees, 25, it actually will station later in the year at 24, almost 25. So it's precisely square the Uranus. And since it's not done with the Jupiter has already been there, this is totally active at the moment. And then the final outer planet that I use, Eris, which is the planet that is beyond Pluto, was responsible for bumping Pluto out of the order, in the astronomy at least, not in the astrology. This is 23 degrees. Once you know that this could float a little bit by a degree up or down, this planet is close enough to the angle to be a problem. Though I'm reluctant to count it too much in the sense that wherever it is, it's already been the case for quite a while and will be the case for quite a while from now. So it's a tricky planet to use because it moves so slowly that it would not be my first choice to strengthen the case. However, it definitely doesn't weaken the case. It's part of the deal. Now, one of the things you notice with this chart is that it also vibes really strongly to the eclipse that is coming up, the solar eclipse, which is going to happen at 21 degrees. That's also incredibly close to this ascendant. And so it adds symbolism, and it's a case where you see where eclipses can be part of the situation. I don't think without the Pluto and the Uranus at the same time, this eclipse would ever be this catastrophic. But adding the eclipse definitely strengthens the situation. And so it definitely correlates and adds fuel to the fire, so to speak. Now, you see that this chart connects in a really strong way to the chart for the current Prime Minister, Netanyahu, because notice he has his sun and moon at 20 and 27 Libra respectively. So if I show it like this, where this is the Israeli chart, and you see the planets on the outside, these are Bibi's planets, and you see how the sun and moon are near the Israeli ascendant. You see that the Mars are essentially the same. He has Pluto on the Israeli Saturn, Uranus on the same degrees as Venus, and then the Jupiter, which is the planet of the homeland, literally, it's right on the IC-MC axis. And furthermore, his ascendant degrees are close to the Israeli Jupiter. So there's a definite connection between his planets and the Israeli chart, which makes a lot of sense. He's one of the longest serving prime ministers. There is total identification with the country. Of course, this also tells you that he himself is currently experiencing the Mars, for example, right on his sun. So he's in a warlike mood, obviously, based on what just happened. And Pluto, in his case, the Pluto cycle, if you go back here and you see the sun, Bibi sun in late Libra, Pluto would be squaring it. Now, I've surmised in previous videos that this would mean a lot of turmoil for him. So far, the Pluto square his sun has been the tremendous turmoil that Israel was already experiencing on account of changing rules related to the Supreme Court, which was being resisted mightily. And Pluto energy, as you may have heard me say in the past, strongly correlates to fascist impulses, becoming totalitarian, becoming a bit like a king, the overlord was being resisted mightily. But of course now it tends to happen when this kind of chaos ensues. Countries tend to tilt to the right, and the populace is more willing to accept right-wing mentality because of the danger that is posed and so forth. So this would be an example of Pluto in this case was really pressuring him, and now in a sense it becomes an ally in terms of his position of power and staying in charge. You do see in Netanyahu's case why he gets himself involved in corruption and a lot of, to put it bluntly, Trumpy behavior, deception. Mercury conjunct Neptune. Neptune is famous for deception and gaslighting. And you also see this a lot when Jupiter squares persons, important planets. Jupiter square the sun and moon. You get arrogance and you get overexpansion. You get behavior that, let's just say, is very unbecoming of leaders, because they don't respect boundaries, and so then they get in trouble. And this guy, his whole career, has been in one sense a strong leader, but in another is constantly surrounded by or implicated in various forms of cheating and corruption. Now, the point is, how long does this go? Well, certainly, if you look at the immediate situation with the Pluto being where it is, this pretty much takes care of the rest of the year, because these degrees continue to be really active. And one of the ways you read when you see exact degrees Pluto to Mars and you're looking at a warlike situation, that's likely to continue. Basically death. It's the death energy. But then if you are thinking, well, what about in the future beyond that? Then we switch to this, where you see that Pluto will be in Capricorn until about the end of January, whereupon it'll be in Aquarius most of the year. But the fact that it'll be in Capricorn in here in late 24, so still more than close enough to link to this Mars, because it's close by degree, even if you look at the Mars as 2818. If you do a 1 degree precessional correction to account for the age of Israel, which puts it in the close to 80 years, it's about a degree. So that definitely extends it into the end of Capricorn for Pluto, meaning measuring from Pluto, you're looking at least the end of 24. But the problem is that that would be probably the first level, where perhaps something along the lines of the rest of 23, most likely deadly violence, and 24 at minimum skirmishes and continued high tension. But I don't think it'll be solved completely, even when we go into 2025, because then you have to look at the Uranus, and you see that in early 25, Uranus is still in the degrees of the Israeli sun. This station here in February of 25 is the same as the August 2023 station. And Israel isn't free of this Uranus energy on that account until at least the spring of 25 at minimum, before you can talk about it leaving the solar degrees. And meanwhile, the Neptune cycle has it in square, and this is a square that continues in some fashion until here you see it the spring of 25. It enters Aries briefly, but it comes back all the way into late 25. The final exit is early 26, because by then it stops irritating the Jupiter opposite Uranus in the chart completely. So my feeling is this is going to go on for years before it's completely solved. I mean, I'd be amazed if you sorted through these aspects and it happened earlier than that. It is curious to see, well, curious in a morbid kind of way, but you see that the Jupiter-Uranus opposition in the Israeli chart is the axis of neighbors, the third, and in that sense you would point to Hamas or the Palestinians as neighbors, but then the conflict with neighbors because of Uranus opposing it, and Uranus being the planet that is extremely active right now, in a very real sense, reveals that as well. And this is verified by the fact that if you go back to the 2002-2003 period, when there was a massive intifada, there's lots of murder and mayhem. It was a totally awful period. And that was when Saturn and Pluto were opposing each other. Saturn was traveling through Gemini up here, and Pluto was down in Sagittarius, thereby triggering the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. So in other words, it's triggering the very axis that involves neighbors, and therefore is very reflective of the way this chart works. All right, I'll stop there, although I sincerely hope that loss of life can be minimized. But unfortunately, based on what I'm seeing here, I am not very hopeful on that account.